That claw is real, not a prop, not an artistic exaggeration, not something dug up from a museum drawer. That is the inner toe of a living bird walking through rainforest right now. A 125mm straight dagger attached to a foot that can drive it through skin, muscle, and organ in a single forward kick. An evolution which has spent the last 66 million years quietly disarming things that no longer need to be armed, never touched it. The question is not whether the cassowary is dangerous. It is. Not whether it looks prehistoric. It does. The question is why. Why does an animal that eats fruit, that wanders forest floors, that poses no credible threat to anything large enough to be a predator, still carry a weapon that belongs on a raptor? Why did evolution leave it there? The claw is only the beginning. This bird is walking around with a bony helmet no one can fully explain, a voice that operates below the threshold of human hearing, and a body plan that is, in the strictest scientific sense, not a bird that looks like a dinosaur. It is a dinosaur, full stop, and it kept everything. Start at the beginning, not the cassowary's beginning, the beginning. 66 million years ago, the asteroid hit. The non-avian dinosaurs went with it. What survived was a single clade, the birds, and they survived because they were small, because they could eat seeds through a famine, because they were, in the language of evolutionary biology, generalists when the specialists all died. From that bottleneck, every bird alive today descends. Every sparrow, every penguin, every eagle. And the cassowary. The lineage the cassowary belongs to is called Paleognathi. It is the oldest surviving branch of the bird family tree. Molecular evidence suggests that cassowaries and emus diverged from a common ancestor roughly 25 to 30 million years ago, long before Australia and New Guinea separated into the geography we know today. Around 800,000 years ago, ancestral cassowaries were crossing periodic land bridges between Australia and New Guinea, spreading into the island chains, diversifying into the 3 species alive today. The southern cassowary, Casuarius casuarius, is the largest and most studied, second heaviest bird on Earth after the ostrich, the heaviest bird in Australia. An adult male typically weighs up to 55 kilograms. A female can exceed 76. It walks upright on 2 legs, covered in stiff black feathers that look more like coarse hair, with a neck blazing blue and red. And on its head, a structure that has been confusing scientists for decades. More on that shortly. First, the claw. The cassowary has 3 toes. The middle toe is the longest, built for balance and locomotion. The outer toe provides stability. The inner toe is essentially vestigial in terms of locomotion. It barely touches the ground. It exists almost entirely as a weapon. The cassowary's inner claw, technically the second digit, grows to around 125 millimeters in adults. It is straight, laterally compressed, and pointed. It does not hook like a talon. It stabs like a blade. The attack behavior is documented in meticulous detail by Christopher Coffron, a researcher with Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service who spent years analyzing 221 cassowary attacks on humans recorded between 1912 and 1996. He published his findings in the Journal of Zoology in 1999. The pattern was consistent and specific. The cassowary does not maul. It does not bite. It jumps, sometimes with both feet leaving the ground simultaneously, and it kicks forward with the inner claw leading, using the full mass of its body as kinetic force. The lacerations are not random. They are deep, straight, and can penetrate to organs. In most cases in Coffron's study, the human survived, usually because the encounter was brief and the bird disengaged. But the anatomy does not leave much room for luck. In April 1926, a 16-year-old named Philip McLean and his younger brother Granville found a cassowary on their property near Mossman, Queensland. They attacked it with clubs, a decision that became the first recorded human fatality from a cassowary. The bird knocked Philip down, and while he lay on the ground, it kicked him in the neck, a single wound, 1.25 centimeters wide. It opened the jugular. He died shortly after. The second confirmed modern fatality did not happen in a rainforest. It happened in Florida. On April 12, 2019, a 75-year-old man named Marvin Hajos was attacked by his own captive southern cassowary at his property in Alachua County. He had apparently entered the enclosure. The bird killed him. Of all the details in this story, that one keeps landing wrong. The idea that this animal, in Florida, in the 21st century, in a pen, was still capable of what its ancestors were capable of 50 million years ago. The weapon was never decommissioned. Evolution had every opportunity, and it did not take it. The reason is ecological, and it does not follow the conventional logic that animals only keep dangerous weapons if they need them for hunting or competition. The cassowary is not a predator. It is overwhelmingly a fruit eater, and a critical one. The wet tropics of Queensland, roughly 9,000 square kilometers of rainforest that covers just 0.2% of the Australian continent, contains more than 100 plant species that depend on the cassowary to disperse their seeds, not as one option among many. The cassowary is the only animal in Australia large enough to swallow whole the fruits of certain large-seeded rainforest trees. Without it, those plants stop moving. Their populations contract. The forest structure itself begins to change. The cassowary is what ecologists call a keystone species. Remove it, and what collapses is not just one species, but an entire web of dependencies built over millions of years. So it is not a predator. It does not hunt with the claw. It walks through forest, eats fruit, and deposits seeds across enormous distances, which makes it one of the most ecologically important animals in its region. And yet it is more anatomically capable of killing you than almost any other bird alive. The claw persisted not because the cassowary went looking for fights. It persisted because the cassowary, despite being large, despite being dangerous, exists in an environment with real threats. Feral pigs, dogs, dingoes, and historically, large predatory lizards across the Australasian region. A bird that cannot fly, that raises its chicks on the ground, that walks through dense rainforest where anything could be in the next thicket. This bird needs a last resort. And the last resort has been enough. The claw was not put down because putting it down was never worth the cost. But the claw is not the only thing evolution left untouched. Look at the head. That structure, the helmet rising from the skull, bony, laterally compressed, covered in a keratinous sheath, is called a casque. In adult southern cassowaries, it grows to 18 or 20 centimeters tall. It appears at around 2 years of age and keeps developing. It is among the most conspicuous anatomical features on any living bird, and as of right now, in 2026, no one fully agrees on what it does. The hypotheses have accumulated over decades. The first intuitive guess, that it protects the head when the bird pushes through dense rainforest, has some logic to it. A cassowary moving at speed through thick vegetation leads with its head down and forward. In 1988, Crome and Moore described the casque as having internal bony trabeculae, a spongy architecture that could absorb impact. It would make structural sense as a battering ram, but it does not fully explain why the casque varies so dramatically between individuals in ways that seem tied to display rather than protection. In 2016, paleozoologist Darren Naish and cassowary specialist Richard Perrin published an anatomical study in Historical Biology, proposing that the casque likely serves multiple roles simultaneously, sociosexual signaling being primary, with the elaborate variation in casque shape and size functioning as honest display of individual quality, age, and dominance. They also raised the possibility that the casque plays a role in low-frequency acoustic transmission. That leads to the third weapon, the one you cannot see, the one you cannot hear. In October 2003, researchers Andrew Mack and Josh Jones published a paper in the Auk, one of ornithology's flagship journals, reporting that cassowaries produce vocalizations that fall below 20 Hz, below the lower threshold of human hearing, infrasound. They recorded these calls from the dwarf cassowary, Cassowarius bennetti, at Crater Mountain in Papua New Guinea. At least some of what cassowaries are communicating happens in a register that the human ear cannot detect without instrumentation. Infrasound is not a novelty in biology. Elephants use it. Whales use it. Low-frequency sound travels farther through dense material, through forest, through ground, through the physical bodies of other animals than the high-frequency sound does. A cassowary in a closed canopy rainforest, where visual lines of sight extend maybe 10 meters, is operating in an acoustic environment where infrasound is not just useful, it is strategic. It can communicate across distances that visual signals cannot reach, without advertising itself to every creature in range that can hear higher frequencies. Whether the casque contributes to this acoustic function has been the subject of genuine scientific back and forth. Naish and Perron's 2016 paper raised the possibility, but a 2018 CT scan study by Brassey and O'Mahony, which scanned a live southern cassowary, found no airway connection between the casque interior and the respiratory tract, which would be expected if the casque were functioning as a resonance chamber in the conventional sense. They concluded the low-frequency calls most likely originate in the trachea rather than the casque. The acoustic role of the casque, if it has one, remains open. In February 2026, a paper in Scientific Reports added something new. Paleontologist Todd Green, working with the Cassowary Conservation Project in Florida, published findings showing that the cassowary's casque fluoresces under ultraviolet light. He had first observed the phenomenon in 2021. Under UV, the casque glows. The significance is still being worked out, but it raises a real possibility that the casque is a multimodal signal, that it communicates simultaneously through size, shape, infrasound, and now potentially through a UV visible display channel that no one knew was there until recently. Evolution did not just leave the weapon, it appears to have kept building on it, quietly, in frequencies and wavelengths we could not see. Consider what humans made of this animal before any of this science existed. The archaeological record from New Guinea tells a story that is, depending on your frame of reference, either brave or insane. At sites including Yuku and Kiowa, eggshell fragments dated to around 18,000 years ago show a specific pattern. The eggs were collected when the embryos were in late stages of development. Not early, not freshly laid. Late. Which means the people collecting them knew the incubation timeline. They were managing the breeding. They were, as archaeologist Christina Douglas from Penn State argued in a landmark 2021 PNAS study, demonstrating what may be the earliest known evidence of humans controlling bird breeding. Not chickens, not ducks. Cassowaries. Douglas described the cassowary directly, a huge, ornery, flightless bird that can eviscerate you. And people were reaching into its nest anyway. Not just for food, bone artifacts at Kiowa, dated to around 9,000 years ago, show cassowary bones being worked into tools, including jabbers, pointed instruments, the cassowary's own anatomy repurposed as a weapon made from a weapon. There are currently 3 cassowary species alive. The southern cassowary is listed as endangered in Australia under the federal EPBC Act. A 2023 draft recovery plan estimated roughly 5,000 individuals remaining in Australia. The primary killers are not exotic or surprising. Cars, dogs, habitat loss, and direct human feeding that habituates the birds to approaching people and roads. In the Mission Beach region of Queensland, 110 kilometers south of Cairns, 79 of the roughly 125 recorded cassowary deaths in Queensland between 1986 and 2004, around 63%, occurred in a single cluster of habitat fragmented by roads and development. About 89% of remaining essential cassowary habitat falls within protected areas, but the corridors between those areas are where the deaths happen. A new national recovery plan was in preparation for federal release in 2026. The Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, with the management authority established in 1998, remains the core of conservation effort. But 9,000 square kilometers sounds large until you remember it is 0.2% of the continent. The southern cassowary has survived the Cretaceous extinction, the separation of continents, 18,000 years of active human management, and the entire arc of the modern era. What it is struggling with now is not predation and not competition. It is the specific and mundane problem of a world where its forest is interrupted by roads. There is a version of this story that is simple: dangerous bird, dinosaur relic, scary claw. That version exists, and it is accurate as far as it goes. But what makes the cassowary genuinely strange is the accumulation. A claw that belongs on an animal that went extinct 66 million years ago, still functional, still lethal, still doing the thing it evolved to do. A helmet that may be a display structure, an acoustic instrument, and a UV signal all at once, and that scientists are still actively studying as of this year. A voice that operates below the frequency you can hear, carrying messages through rainforest in a register shared with elephants and whales. And underneath all of it, a role in its ecosystem so fundamental that the forest itself would change without it. Evolution is often described as a process of refinement. Things that do not work get pruned. Costs that are not justified disappear. A weapon on an animal that does not hunt should, by that logic, have been trimmed back over the millions of years this bird has been eating fruit. The cassowary kept the weapons evolution should have taken. Evolution looked at the cost, looked at the benefit, and left them exactly where they were. The claw is still there. The casque is still growing. The infrasound is still moving through the forest right now, below what you can hear, between animals whose entire conversation has been happening outside your perception this whole time.